This is full of gas. Well, so I'm at the gas station right by the house. Somehow I ran this truck perfectly out of gas to where it wouldn't start. So I'm messing with the carburetor, the choke, all that, trying to figure out what the hell is going on. The whole time I was dead out of fuel. I could not get the pump to prime. So gonna need to fix that fuel gauge sooner rather than later. I'm not gonna have time to mess around with it. I'm just gonna get a new one. So the truck's filling up great. It's not popping off, so we're doing good. Gonna try to see how fuel efficient this thing is. I'm gonna top it all the way off. We are at 23,882 miles. So we'll see what it is when I fill it next. 28 gallons. I think I put about 2 gallons of that gas can in there, so 3 gallons. I think that's plenty fine. I'm not too worried about extending my my pickup tube, but maybe it's something I'll have to think about when I take out the sending unit. 112 bucks. Ouch. So it's the next morning, just got fueled up. We are at 23,961, so we're getting just under 8 miles to the gallon. We're out here getting some more work done on the Bronco. Did a little bit off camera. The clunking sound from accelerating, just slapping the pedal on and off, I believe it was this here, the transmission mount. It only had this bolt in it and it was halfway in. This bolt was missing, so I thought, oh, I'll just put another bolt in right there. It wasn't that easy. I ended up having to take this entire transmission plate out and cleaning out this hole, retapping it, put everything back in. It's all in there nice and tight now. I'm very confident that was the problem. I could get a jack under here and I could jack under my transfer case and this whole thing would move all around. So now that that's in there, it is tight. So pretty excited about that. Next, I'm going to put the shroud on the radiator. So here we have one of two options. Pull the radiator, put the shroud on the truck, then put the radiator back in. Or I can just take the fan out and then put the radiator shroud in and then put the fan back in. And I already have enough scratches on the radiator. I'd like to not touch the radiator, so I'm gonna work on pulling these 4 bolts out of the fan, get the fan out of the way, and I gotta find a good way to mount the shroud to this new radiator. So I'll get started on that now. All right, radiator shroud is on. Ended up re-drilling the top holes on the shroud, and then I re-drilled the bottom holes on the aluminum part. Kind of a combination. So it's really sturdily mounted. I might end up putting something for anti-vibration up here, but it's only when I do this, and I think that it's just because there's nothing mounted in the center. So the fan is still sticking out a little bit. It's like right in here, so I might end up building a spacer or buying a spacer to get it closer, but I mean, that's the original fan, so I'm guessing it's going to be just fine. So I'll just get the original fan in, and if it's still not cooling good enough, I'll get a little tighter, and if it's still not going good, I will build a custom aluminum shroud with electronic fan, but hoping to avoid all that. So I'm gonna get the fan in and wrap this up. Working on the fuel gauge problem. I think this is gonna just have to be one of those mysteries, because in one of the first videos I tested this and it was working just fine. Tested it again, it's working just fine, but when I would unplug it, the gauge would go all the way to empty. When I would plug it in, it would go all the way to full, which means that somehow or another the plug was making this thing ground out. So I'm thinking perhaps when this had fuel in it, maybe somehow it was grounding through here, but honestly, just such an odd situation. I'm gonna try to just, well, I gotta put the new one in. You know what? This is full of gas. Well, just got the fuel sending unit back up, got the fuel lines back on, and got the tank back installed. So I'm just gonna do a quick check over, make sure I didn't pull off my filler neck, which honestly feels really good. So I'll get those 7 gallons put back in that I pulled out. We'll get it started up and we'll see where the fuel gauge reads. Well, that's not a good sign. I turned the key on, fuel gauge pegs out right away, so not off to a good start. I'm gonna go unplug it and see if I can find this ground. It's got to be shorting out somewhere. So after all that work, still having issues. However, I am doing now what I should have done. So right now I tested it at the sender. I have 40 ohms of resistance. I tested it at this plug. Now keep in mind, 78, 79 should have an orange, and right across from it will be a black. So it's the second pin down on this side. So you can test your resistance. If you have a full tank and you test your resistance and it's still around 70, well then you have a bad sending unit. Or you have a bad float, more likely a bad float. Now if you have a full tank and it reads about 8, then you're right on the money. Right now I have closer to the lower half. I only have 7 gallons of a 33-gallon tank, and I'm reading at 40 ohms. I read 40 ohms at the sender, I read 40 ohms at the plug, and I read 40 ohms at this plug. So far everything is correct up to here. So I have the only place to go from here, or this plug, is into the cluster. So what I need to do now is I need to take the cluster off and double check I'm getting 40 ohms at the cluster. So I'm gonna plug this back in and I'm gonna start on the cluster. So I got the gauge sitting on my lap here and I'm just tracing these lines out with my hands, and it appears this tab here, so the insidemost one, is the gauge regulator. Now I can tell that because it goes all the way over to this prong of the gauge, which goes through this, I believe it's some sort of resistor, into this one, and then it touches the ground of each actual gauge except for the alternator gauge. So we have our temp gauge, we have our oil pressure gauge, and we have our fuel gauge. Now the only gauge that's giving me problems is the fuel gauge. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to test the resistance between this prong and this prong. Sorry if I missed that. These two prongs with it plugged in. Now it should be about 40, which is what I had back at the sending unit, but it wouldn't surprise me if it's not, because it does go through this resistor or capacitor or whatever it is. Maybe isolator. It might just be a simple diode to keep the flow of electricity going backwards and igniting and burning out an element or something like that. So what I need to do is I need to somehow test this gauge, and I'm going to do that by just tracing this wire goes up and over. So it's actually just these two here. So I'll just match that up with the plug and actually just check the plug. So this one and this one, which is going to be these two right here. So I'll get you the pin numbers here in a second. It's going to be these two right here. So 1, 2, 3, number 4 and number 5 from the end with the larger tabs. And there are numbers on here. I'm not going to be able to figure out what they are because it's got all this crappy paint on. So these two here, I'm going to put my ohm meter on and figure out if I got 40. If I got 40 here, I'm going to say it's the gauge. So it looks like that's our problem. 2.5 certainly is very low resistance, so that would be pegging this gauge out. So I need to figure out how it's going from that plug to right here and getting such low resistance. Typically that means that there's the opposite of a resistor or an amplifier, but that really wouldn't make sense. So we're going to need to figure out how this orange wire gets out there. That's going to be confusing, so I'm going to have to start digging into this. So here's where I'm at. Somehow there's a green and red, or a green and orange wire out at the firewall, which is like a 75 wire harness, and somehow it ends back up orange with yellow out here. So I need to figure out where it goes from green and orange to orange and yellow. Now, ooh, my bad. Now I'm looking at the harness here and I see this, and I can't tell for sure, but this looks like a kind of jumbled up stuff. So good Lord, I'm gonna start taking this apart, this electrical tape, and see what I can find down in here. This might be the answer to my problem, but it just doesn't make sense that this is orange. I'll show you here so you completely understand my dilemma. This is orange the way it's supposed to be, but if you go to the exact opposite side, this is green and orange, or green and red, probably closer to green and red. So why does it come out here and there's no plugs between here and orange? There's no plugs between this plug and the actual gauge cluster. So I'm guessing this is spliced in somewhere, and we have to separate that harness and find where this is spliced in. I could totally be talking out of my ass right now, but I'm kind of down to the wire here. I really don't have anything else to check. So I'm getting 6 ohms out here, and I'm getting 40 ohms out of that plug. So somewhere there's a short, and I'm gonna find it. So here's our problem. With this plug, there's only an orange wire in. Well, somehow or another, these 2 wires come together here. So this is inside the loom. So you have the green with the red and the blue, and they go into this orange with yellow. So I don't know if this is a fusible link or simply just a connector. I would put my money on just simply a connector. Now, when I come out to the engine bay, now keep in mind that plug was unplugged, and we have essentially no resistance. How on earth is a gauge going to function when you have no resistance? Now keep in mind, I'll just touch these 2 together, same exact, so it's literally 0 resistance. So what is the purpose of the gauge if it's just going to be connected? Really don't know what the hell's going on here, and I fact checked it with the old harness. So obviously the gauge is not connected to this, and when I pull up the 6-pin, of course there's no resistance because the black wire and the orange wire don't touch. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to disconnect that yellow part of the wire. Now I think that's just a helper ground. I don't think that it's actually serving any purpose. So I believe if I just unhook the blue wire, the gauge should start working. So I'm going to give that a go. Oh. So it's disconnected now. Now that straight lined in. So I'm gonna see what happens. Look at that, we have nearly 40 ohms of resistance. So I'm gonna plug the gauge back in and let's see if the gauge starts working. As terrible as it would be to just have to cut one wire and make everything work, totally don't understand why. I'll have to do some digging, but we're gonna plug that in and see what happens. So before I do this, like I said, we have 7 gallons out of a 33-gallon tank. 7 times 4 is 28, so we know that we have more than a quarter. So I'm guessing it's gonna be about a third of a tank or so. So I'll get this plugged in and show you what it looks like. Gauge is plugged in, key on. Oh my gosh, you gotta be kidding me. So that's probably the weirdest repair I've ever done, but here we are fixing stuff, I guess. So I'm gonna button this all back up. I have no idea what the hell the reasoning is on that, but I'm just happy it's working again. So I have a lot of cleanup to do, and I just did like a probably 4-hour job, and all it needed was a wire cut. So I guess that, well, I don't know what the lesson is there, but there it is. Sitting here in traffic. Gas is just about all run out. And fuel station's right up there. So I'm gonna get it fueled up and see what it looks like once it's all full up. So I was only able to get 17 gallons in because now my fuel hose is kinked, which really sucks. So I'm gonna try cutting this and shortening this up a little bit. Well, don't know what the hell that means, but hopefully it's just a ground issue. Damn, does that suck though. All right, we're sitting comfortable at a quarter tank with 17 gallons. It's got to be a grounding issue. So that wire I ended up cutting, I'm gonna end up just grounding that solid to the frame. So hopefully that'll solve these issues. All right, well, I fought and struggled getting this kink out of here. What I ended up doing is taking this hose off, cutting just a little bit, like ½ inch or so, and then I shoved a stainless steel tube that was about the same diameter, and I got a hose clamp in here. This might look loose, but it's actually just the outside. So I got this hose clamp tight on there. So there's a little bit of a lip in there, which might affect the gas flow, but it's nothing like it was. I mean, I took this off and gas just poured out of here because it was a big old dam there. So now what I'm doing to fix the fuel gauge is there's that wire that I cut underneath here. Let me get a light. Come on now. We're gonna find that wire right here. That's the one we cut yesterday, and I'm gonna just ground that. Obviously not the side that you're looking at, but the other side right there. So I'm just gonna ground that to the frame. I don't know if I put it in another video, but you can see all those grounds. So usually when I do a ground or something like that, where I know I got a good clean connection up there, I'll put like 5 wires off of it. Obviously 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, yeah. So I only used a few of them, so I always just have grounds ready to go. And I do that on the power circuits too. You can see up there, there's a few light switch powers just ready to go that I can tap into later. So cool little trick. That's gonna make this way easier. So I'll get this shoved into here and I'll get it all crimped up. So before we had to ground through the painted tank, and we were only getting about a quarter tank. This was on the way home, so I'm gonna turn it on and see. We put 17 gallons in, and then we drove it for about 50 miles. So 50 divided by 8 is about 6.3 or so. So we'll be 6 gallons down from that, so it'll be 11 gallons, which should be a third of a tank. So if we're near a third, we're good to go. Oh, that's way higher than it would go before. Uh-oh. Oh, look at that. So I guess we have more than half a tank, but it stopped right on the money. So that's pretty good. Let's see, I did have some gas, I guess. I had some gas before I put in those 17 gallons. So I guess all that's left to do is fill it up and see how many gallons this fuel tank will take. So I think we got all our fuel issues figured out. It's gonna make this truck a lot more reliable on the street, and for this big trip we got planned in, let's see, today is Cinco de Mayo. We have 26 days then before this trip. Here we are at the gas station. Got all the fuel gauge good to go. It's reading really happy. We're fueling up now. Just going into the tank, no problems. We're looking really good. So I'm gonna count that as a win. That's the end of this video. Appreciate you watching. Stay tuned for more.